yet?
I am now. Thank you.
Okay, great. No. So thanks everyone for coming to this presentation. This is a work in progress that I'm doing with my colleague Manvi, Devesh, and Sunil, all of them in the IFPRI New Delhi office. The main idea for this work is I have a tendency to keep staring at numbers, macroeconomic numbers, or even like microeconomic numbers. And I noticed that even as the agriculture GDP, the share of agriculture in GDP is shrinking, that of off-farm food economy actually is not shrinking at the same rate. It might even be growing. And in world over, you'll see that in the last 30, 40 years, including in developed countries, you'll see that the farmer share of the consumer spend on food is going down. In the US, it's like 12, 13%. In India, it would be somewhat higher. So there is something between farmer and consumers, and that the middle, what we're calling, seems to be growing everywhere for various reasons. And it seems like it was growing in India. And while this presentation is about India, my sense is Bangladesh and Nepal would show many similar patterns. So that's why we just started thinking about, if you look at, this is a typical food systems map or schematic. Different people plot it differently, but I just picked the one that we have been using in systems project under ACES. And you'll see in all this food system map, the value chain, as they say, is in the center. We talk a lot about consumer. I think a lot of food systems work has focused on consumers and nutrition angle. ECR is supporting production side, but most of the food system, even books like the one that Prabhu wrote, etc., they've talked about what goes in between. But careful analysis of how big is the sector, what is its role, what are its challenges, etc. I didn't find much work on it, at least not in South Asian context. There's some work on supermarkets, etc., that Tom Reardon and others have done, but not looking at a whole sector-wide look at this. So that was our inspiration, that we are working on food systems in this SDIP project, and I just thought that we are focusing more on production. There are other people who have worked on consumption, but what about the system that links production to consumers, works in there, what kind of firms, etc. So that was the idea behind this project when Manvi and I started working on this project. So I'm sorry I'm using this pejorative that apparently Napoleon used for the British, but I guess in India we wear it as a badge of honor. So we are a nation of shopkeepers. If you look at not registered companies and that are not farms or construction firms, in 2015-16, the last time for which we have data, there were around 60+ million of them unincorporated enterprises. Unincorporated enterprises, by that I mean they're not under Companies Act. Okay, and they can be of different sizes, formal, informal. Some of them may even be listed on the stock market. That's the highest level of formalization as when we look at it. So yeah, there are 60+ million of them. 1/3 of them, more than 1/3, were in the food sector. Okay, so these 21 million, and by now it would be around 25, 26 millions, we don't know. They play a very important role of linking India's almost 150 million farmers to our 1.3, 1.4 billion consumers that are there. And they're not just large in number, they are also a major source of employment. So again, 2015-16 data shows that there were like 35 million either entrepreneurs, meaning workers of these firms, or employees that worked in these firms. 25 million of them are men, and 10 million, around 10 million women. Just to get a sense of what percentage, around India's workforce, it keeps shrinking during these recent shocks, etc., is around 500 million, 470 to 480, of which there are 110 million women. The women workforce is going down actually. So around 10% of women and 7-8%, 6 to 8% of men work in these food enterprises. Okay, so big employer, large number of firms. And like I said, if you look at the numbers over the last few years, it's growing much faster. The off-farm economy, which is the right side, is growing pretty rapidly. Agriculture sector in India is kind of stagnant. We've never achieved the 4% growth that we aspire to. While this sector has been growing at 8-9%, at least between 2010-11 and 2015-16, the sector grew quite rapidly. So its share in the entire food economy is still small. Is, as you can see, agriculture, the ag and allied GDP is around 16 trillion. This is so only 12-13%, but it increased from 10 to 12-13%. So its share is growing. Not only that, I just want to, the number of food enterprises is also increased, did increase between 10-11 and 15-16. There was like 10-15% increase. And the employment is also, as the number of new firms are coming up, more people are getting employed. So it's becoming a bigger source of employment, contributor to value creation both. One thing that I want to point out is that all of this data is up to 2015-16, the last enterprise survey was done. I'll talk more about enterprise survey in a bit. Since then, Indian economy has gone through a lot of challenging times. GST, imposition of goods and services tax, demonetization, and now lockdown. These things have been, the food sector has been hit quite hard by some of these shocks. So the new numbers, whenever the next survey comes, may show that the growth has slowed down, or there may even be a recession in the sector. We don't know. We don't have that those numbers yet. They had like in 2015-16, it's like around $40 billion economy. Just for comparison, agriculture was around $360 billion. The number increased by 2.4 million, like I said, and the number of workers employed increased by 4.5. I don't know why I did that. If you look at, I do not have, I am going to talk more about the national picture, but I just, because our work in this project is focused on EGP, we did a lot of state level analysis too. I'm going to show just one slide to talk about how it is even more important in Bihar and West Bengal, the two EGP states that we are looking for. EGP stands for Eastern Gangetic. So if you look at off-farm, people who are working not on farm, who are working in enterprises of any kind, in West Bengal and Bihar, the percentage of women working in and men working in these things is significantly higher. It's an even bigger employer. Food enterprises are even bigger employers in Eastern India compared to the rest of it. West Bengal is very interesting. West Bengal is very interesting. There in rural West Bengal, a majority of food enterprises are run by women. And even at the state level, urban and rural combined, almost half of them are run by women. It's quite unique. It's women's role in running food enterprises is bigger in West Bengal than in any other large state of India, including southern states where women tend to do better. You look at Bihar. Bihar is just a neighboring state. Their women's share of number of enterprises that they run is significantly smaller. Okay, so Eastern India is different in these two respects. Other thing is that on the other hand, if you look at Bihar, there the growth between 10-11 and 15-16 in food enterprises was significantly faster than the national level or in West Bengal. And also the share of off-farm economy in the total food economy is larger in Bihar and even in West Bengal compared to the rest of India. This could be because, especially in Bihar, the ag is not that productive, while off-farm enterprises are dependent on not just ag, but other sectors and general household income. So that might be the reason why the share of farm economy is larger than in Bihar than in other states. But so Eastern India, food enterprises are even more important in terms of employment, in terms of contribution to the economy, and in terms of, especially in West Bengal, women's role, how many women they employ, they give a source of cash income. Okay, so it's kind of I brought in the data later because I wanted to motivate the presentation. The point that our reason for doing it is that it seems to be a pretty large sector playing a very important role in Eastern Gangetic Plains, but in other parts of India too, that doesn't get much attention. The rest of the paper, let me just tell you what are the data we're using. This entire work is based on secondary data. So when we look at developing countries and their GDP estimation, there's always a big challenge that they have large informal economies and there are no direct ways of measuring their GDP contribution or value addition. So what Government of India does is every 10 years, it does an economic census where all off-farm enterprises are brought in, like surveyed, they are counted, classified into different types, and then based on that census, sampling survey is done over every 5 years. So we use those, they call enterprise survey. We use this enterprise survey data from 11-12 and 10-11 and 15-16. We use more of 15-16 data, but 10-11 is used for comparison. And it's a very large survey. So in 15-16, nearly 300,000 firms were surveyed. So this survey tells you a lot about the firm and a little bit about the owners, their education, their skills, etc. We also were interested in people who are employed in it or they own the enterprise, their own economic status and other things. So we combined this with labor survey, which basically is an employment and unemployment survey. In old times, it was called unemployment and employment survey. Now it's called employment and unemployment survey. Now it's called periodic labor force survey. It has become more frequent. So we use data from 2018-19, which is the most recent one, for the employment and understanding who works there, what is their condition, etc. It's also a fairly large survey, almost 400,000 household individuals covered, and it has data on consumption expenditure of the household, so that they're poor or not. Who are there other people working? Are the households dependent entirely on food enterprises, the ones who work in it, or they have multiple sources of income, etc. Like I said, all of these we are focusing on, and the enterprise survey focuses on unincorporated enterprises. This means FPOs don't get covered. And there are very few anyway, so shouldn't affect. And anything that is registered under Companies Act are also not covered. These are all off-farm enterprises and do not include construction sector, etc. Anyway, our focus is on food enterprises. So just a little bit more on the data that is there in the 70th round of enterprise survey. So there, of the 290,000 firms that they collected data from, the sample of food enterprises is quite large, 86,000. And there are 5 types of food enterprises that they collect data from. There is food manufacturers. And when I say food, it's food, beverages, tobacco, wholesale of agri products, retail. And retail is split into 2 specialized stores, food stores, and non-specialized stores. And then the services activity, restaurants, and other things. I'm just combined because wholesale, as you can guess, the smallest in number by design almost. So the biggest part of food enterprises are the retail outlets. 60% of them are retail outlets. If you go to Bihar, especially, and even West Bengal, the share of retail outlets in the total different kinds of food enterprises is even larger. Services would include restaurants, etc. Restaurants, dhabas, all of those. Okay, so these are the 5 different kinds of food enterprises, just to get a sense. And you will see there is a lot of, in India, the jargon that is often used for unincorporated enterprises is MSME, medium and small enterprise. I'm forgetting the full form. So, and there is a lot of literature on MSMEs, these unincorporated enterprises. Yeah, we thought that there is still, despite there being a lot of literature on MSMEs, small enterprises in India, food enterprises still merit a special attention and analysis because they seem to be different from non-food enterprises in multiple ways. So these firms are on average younger. The median age of food enterprises is only 8 years. The mean is 10. They have fewer employees per firm, and their turnover or the value added is significantly smaller, on average, significantly smaller than the non-food enterprises. So an average food enterprise is much smaller than the non-food enterprise. They're smaller in size. They're more likely to be informal, not being registered with any of the government authorities under any of the government acts, etc., compared to formal enterprises. You can go over the others. Other thing that we found very interesting is that women play a bigger role. So women's share in ownership or even in employees of food enterprises is significantly larger than the non-food enterprises. Okay, they are more likely to be rural, And we have, I'll talk later about degrees of informality, but most of them are very small and many of them do not have bank accounts. Like I saw, the fewer of them have bank accounts, though that may have changed in recent times with a massive Government of India program to ensure everyone has a bank account. Most of them do not maintain any book of accounts, and that creates a special challenges that I'll come to hopefully later. Okay, and the challenge is basically if you do not have a balance sheet, already most of them do not have much of by collateral, etc. Then lending to them or targeting them for government benefit programs, etc., becomes very challenging. So that's another challenge that food enterprises face even more. Um, they're different in other ways too. Is they all small enterprises in India, their mortality rates are very high. Life expectancy is small. So a lot of firms get created every year and a lot of them go out of business. The other thing that you will notice is a lot of these small firms, most of them I showed in the previous slide have fewer than 5 employees, 90% of them. But if you look at the per month gross value addition, which is basically a measure of monthly net income of these firms, many of them, almost 1/3, sure, is less than if these guys were to work in for a minimum wage job or for a Narega job. It seems like it could be that it seems to be one of the indicators of distress entrepreneurship. These are many of these guys who are running these small, not very profitable firms. They might be doing it because it's convenient or society respects an entrepreneur more than a casual worker. But a lot of them may be in this sector and running food enterprises because they do not have other options. It's a distress choice. And that could also be one of the reasons why we see very high mortality of this. As soon as you get a better option, you probably shut down your shop and you move on to some other job. And that's why we see in the data that a lot of them do not live very long. I'll talk more about the firm mortality or closing down subsequently. Yeah. So you will see what we do is we have 2 rounds of data, but it's not a panel data. They're not tracking the same firms. So we have to infer how long the firms last, etc., based on comparing the 2 rounds of data. So one thing you'll see is that 2015-16, they started asking a new question is like, when was this firm set up or came under the current management? And 1/3 of all the firms that were there surveyed in 15-16 were not there in 2010. So they are less than 5 years old. So there are a lot of new firms come up. My hunch is, and I haven't tested it, is that when the economy is doing worse, when the employment opportunities elsewhere go down, more people just to get by, to be engaged themselves, set up this firm. So 1/3 of them were like set up in last 3-4 years only. And then the ones that were there in 2011, almost 25% of them didn't survive up to 2016. So a lot of new firms get created, a lot of new firms get closed down. Okay, so anytime you're looking at growth of the firms, like I said, 6.4 million new were formed in these 5 years, but 4 million also died. So there is a very high rate of going out of business, and that may be because the business didn't work, or it may be, and we can't check for that in the data, that the entrepreneur who is running it got a better opportunity elsewhere. May I request someone's mic is on to just mute it? Thank you. So, so far we've known that these firms are incredibly small. Most of them are informal, and they have short life expectancies. A lot of them go out of business in very quickly or with a high frequency, either by choice or because these firms do not have enough buyers or they're not making money. Second part that I alluded to earlier, I also wanted to talk about is women in food enterprises. So we know that women play a lot of big role in our entire food economy, food system, right from growing the food to cooking it, disposing it, all of that. And most of the time, what we see is that women's role doesn't get acknowledged. The data are not there to capture their role adequately, right? Luckily, the food enterprise data does do a good job of capturing women's contribution, women's participation in these enterprises. So almost 1/4 of all food enterprises at the national level are owned by women. If you look at food manufacturing units, they're more than half of the firms. Units that are cooking food, processing food, they're more than half of them. And I'm talking about unincorporated enterprises. If you look at food companies, we won't have such large role of it. Okay, so these are unincorporated enterprises, and there you'll see that women own, especially in the manufacturing sector, they own more than half of all the units. In retail stores and food service business, they have a smaller. So cooking food, where you are selling cooked food, it seems like directly, they seem to have an outsized role. Wholesale trade, as many of you would have walked in India's or South Asia's wholesale markets, you barely find women owning them. They might be working there to clean, sorting, grading, etc. But in ownership, they have a very small role. It's entirely male dominated. This was about entrepreneurs. If you look at women employed in food enterprises, again, nearly half of them are in manufacturing units are women. In retail outlets also, their ownership is low, but as those employed there, it's quite high. Similarly, in restaurants, dhabas type sector, or hotels that serve, they have a decent share. Remember that this becomes interesting, especially when you look at the falling labor force participation of women in India, and also the falling share of women in India's workforce. So compared to women's share in India's total workforce, women's share in the workforce engaged in food enterprises is significantly higher. My sense is, I haven't done sector or subsector by subsector analysis, that food manufacturing is perhaps, as data captures it, perhaps the most gender equal segment of India's economy. When I say gender equal, I am not saying they get equal salaries or they have equal rights. I'll talk about the challenges that women entrepreneurs and workers face in these enterprises. It's just about ownership and representation. Beyond that, the discrimination or the gender discrimination is very much present in this sector too, and I'll talk about it next slide. Yeah. So if you look at all the indicators. So like I said, women-owned enterprises, most of them are the manufacturing ones, and then followed by retail. Look at the mean GVA per firm. GVA is gross value added, which is like net income. It's 1/4 of the men-owned enterprises. Assets, again, 1/3, 1/4 of the assets. Turnover is what's your monthly or annual sale. That too is like almost 20% or so. Firms that are registered under any act, like formality versus informality, again much smaller than men. Every count that you look at it. This is the percentage share of female workers. So let me put it in perspective. I have put it as star. Most of these food enterprises are just one-person show, right? There are very few that have the two kinds as their own account enterprises and establishments. Establishments are enterprises that have employees too. Most food enterprises don't have employees. The few that have employees, women tend to work with other women. Women owners tend to hire other women, while men owners, so the gender mixing and restrictions around it, you can see even in the food enterprise data. Men-owned firms mostly hire men, women-owned firms mostly hire women. We talked about intersectionality. You'll see that Dalit and tribal women are more likely. Dalit and tribal groups are more represented in women-owned firms than men. This could be partly because upper caste women, I should say, so-called upper caste, they have restrictions in entrepreneurship, and it's considered infra-dig. So that may be one of the reasons why you see higher percentage of the tribal women farm ownership. This is the most interesting one, the one in the bold firm that closed. Remember, we compared 2 rounds of data and look at what happened to number of firms, net growth in number of firms. Women-owned enterprises seem to last longer. We do not have a panel data, so we can't say it with great confidence. But there are very few firms between the 2 rounds that closed down. It could be that every single one that was closed down was replaced, But we also looked at the age of these firms, and women-owned firms tend to live longer, maybe because women have fewer options to go. It could be two reasons. Women-owned firms have lower costs, lower asset base, etc. So they can work even with lower margins and lower total earnings. The expectations may be low. The second could be that women, unlike men, if they find a job in, let's say, Punjab, a Bihari entrepreneur would shut down his enterprise and move to Punjab or move to the town to get a better job that pays more. Women do not have those options. And you'll see that on the location one. Is that, and again, bank accounts and maintaining accounting are also lower. But most of women-owned enterprises are run from the household premises, 85% of them, which again shows that I think it could be because they have multiple roles to play, taking care of households, etc., and that forces them to work from household and not go and set up a shop elsewhere. Or it could be that there are movement restrictions, and women would have a tougher time if they were trying to move out and set up a shop. Combine both these reasons, most of these women-owned firms are from household enterprises. That probably also reduces overheads and could be one of the reasons why therefore the women-owned firms last longer. One thing that is not shown in the table is that when it looks at the survey asked about whether you are skilled of the owner, and more women enterprise owner, food enterprise owners are skilled compared to men. So all these advantages, even though they're skilled, and if when you look at the type of skills, most of these skills are learned on the job. Despite having more skills, women-owned firms have lower asset bases, smaller turnovers, lower productivity, even in terms of GPA per worker. And more of them are informal, do not have bank accounts, computer, internet. I'm not showing here because very few are. So it's possible, and it's been seen in other contexts too, in other studies, non-food enterprise-based studies, is that women entrepreneurs have lower returns to their skill or training programs. There's more research on training programs when you train a woman versus men. The returns to training tend to be smaller for women because they lack connections and they lack agency to fully utilize, to fully exploit their skills to make more money, to run bigger or more profitable enterprise. So this is in line with what has been found elsewhere in the literature for even other types of firms. So despite being more skilled and running firms that last longer, women-owned firms operate at a lower level of equilibrium. Next bit, I'm making a switch is from gender ownership in ownership and employment in firms. I'm going to talk about a problem that occupies economists a lot. It's about the formality. So as I showed, most of the food enterprises, even more than non-food enterprises, are informal. There has been a lot of debate in economics literature, like how important is formalization, having a formal status, having a registered status, being legible to government and financial institutions. So there's this big, in late 80s, there's a Peruvian economist, Hernando de Soto. He led this charge where he said that, informality is costly for firms, and given an opportunity, firms would want to become formal because that gives them access to credit and a bunch of other things. One of his books became very famous, and it became the basis for a lot of development programs where that were launched to formalize firms, encourage entrepreneurs to register their firms, get them land titles, etc. He said that it could unleash this economy. Later on, though, when people look a closer look, a number of programs were launched to formalize firms. People found that informality, their opinion is quite mixed. The evidence is quite mixed. Informality doesn't necessarily hold firms back from doing well. Campos et al. Also found that it does not increase firm productivity. Registration itself doesn't increase productivity. From South Asia, there's this famous paper. Demel and Woodruff did a series of work after the tsunami and worked with food entrepreneurs, basically the small food retail outlets. And what they did is they did a randomized control trial where some firms, some retail outlets got some incentives and support to get registered. And they tracked these firms. How are they doing? And they found that all the benefits, the channels through which registration is supposed to help firms, like getting better credit access, borrowing more to expand your operation. The treated group firms didn't do all of those things. So as a result, the outcomes were also not significantly different. What they did, and we do not understand why, is that they started maintaining books of accounts and started having better trust in the government, maybe because they got support. But formalization, the evidence is quite mixed. When we look at our Indian data, and this is not, we try to do matching because we do not have an experimental setup. So we tried something called quotient matching. It's somewhat like propensity score matching. You do find that among food enterprises that are registered on a series of indicators, these firms tend to be larger, they have higher gross value, they are more productive as shown by gross value per worker. They are more likely, NSS asks a question over last 3 years, are you expanding, stagnant or shrinking? Registered firms tend to be expanding, and they pay their higher salary to their sorry, ad quality. Just give me. They pay higher wages to these firms. Matching is supposed to take you closer to causality, because what you do in matching is you control for all other characteristics. You try to find as good a match of registered firms as you could among unregistered firms. We have very large samples. That's good. That helps with getting better matching. We have data on a lot of firm characteristics. That also helps to get do a better job of matching. But still, matching estimators are not considered as reliable as experimental estimates or natural experiment estimates. It could be that there are some unobservable characteristics that we are not capturing, and firms that are registered are already have other qualities that make them more productive, more expansive, like doing better, etc. But it seems that among India's population of firms, registration, having some registered status, formal status, does seem to be helping. If you look at closely at formality, it's not that just becoming registered in one place changes something drastically. There are degrees of informality or degrees of formality. So the same firm may be registered under the panchayat body, but may not be doing any other things that you normally think about that a formal firm should be doing. So just showing you some data. Most of the firms that are registered, food enterprises that are registered under municipal or panchayat authorities. 15-16 India still have VAT or Sales Tax Act. Now it's all GST. So this data would have changed and becoming irrelevant. Most of them are registered under, 75% are not registered. Of those that are registered, most of them are registered under municipal and panchayat act. This is important because if you understand India's governance, it's widely known that India's panchayats and municipalities are very weak as government institutions. Indian government is considered weak. Even within government apparatus of India, our panchayats, and more than panchayats, even the nagar panchayats, the municipalities, urban municipalities are considered very, very weak institutions. Their ability to implement programs, etc., their resources, revenues, etc., are quite small. So if we are trying to do anything to benefit these firms, like government recently, Government of India during Corona launched a more than $1 billion program to upgrade food enterprises. So specifically targeted to food enterprises to make them export worthy, etc. Now, most of these enterprises are not registered with anyone. So finding that kind of enterprises, helping them would be a challenge. Even the ones that are registered, Government of India will have to work with municipality or panchayats, and that's going to be challenging for this program when we are implementing. It's quite an ambitious program. And a big part of the program is about linking it to credit so that the firms have greater resources to capital and the cost of capital becomes lower. But if you look at it, many of these firms, at least in 15-16, did not have bank accounts, or the owner didn't have a bank account in his or her name, and very few maintained accounts. Most of them are small outlets. So it creates a special challenge in accessing loans. Commercial loan would be difficult to get because banks or even non-banking finance companies would want to look at balance sheet at least, even if they are not considering collateral. Plus, as public sector banks target these loans, since there is very little data, The absence of data can lead to mistargeting or deliberate fraud will happen. It has already happened in previous such programs, and a lot of these loans turn out to be what are called NPAs, non-performing assets accounts. A lot of money can get wasted or filched under this process. Because how do you identify it? So two things. One is we need to register. If one has to benefit from these programs, registration has to happen. But the hassle and the cost involved. Firms avoid registration because it brings in a lot of hassles and some taxes too. So those hassles have to be reduced for entrepreneurs to show any interest in getting registered. Moreover, pure registration alone won't help. There should be some training or some encouragement to create balance sheets, keep books of accounts, etc., which firms don't do because they don't consider worth it or they fear taxation. So this would be a challenge for any program that targets these small firms. So we looked at different degrees of formalization, and we had all variables. Urban enterprises are more likely to be more formal, and where the degrees of formality is like purely registered to highest being you are listed on the stock market. Older firms are more likely to be. It's again not causal. One surprising and one interesting was, so in this regression, any value greater than 1 means that property is associated with greater formalization. Okay, so urban enterprises are almost twice as likely to be formalized. Firms with establishments are those which have employees more than 2 times more likely to be formalized, etc. Somehow, firms that had they're less likely to be formalized. I don't know if it's just an error in the data or there's something deeper going on. I do not have it. As you would expect, women-owned enterprises are much less likely to be formalized in compared to the firms that are owned by men. Larger firms, more than 2 workers, etc., are more likely to be enterprise too. And this is we are comparing within a region, not across regions over the overall sample. One thing, so having small assets, having very little access to institutional loans. I'm not sharing slides on institutional loans. Most firms borrow from friends and neighbors or money lenders. That makes these firms highly vulnerable. Is one thing that makes them that's interesting. So any firm which has more fixed cost and a small variable cost does better when the turnover is higher, when it's doing more business. But such firms, as they are called in financial and highly leveraged operations, if you have a lot of fixed cost, then what happens is whenever the business goes down, either because of supply constraints like during Corona, or because demand goes down because economy is slowing down, etc., then those firms are more likely to go out of business, or they have a tougher time because you need a certain volume of business to recover your fixed cost. Food enterprises, one thing that's good about them is they have low capital costs, and their fixed cost to total cost, operating cost, is much smaller than non-food enterprise. Okay, 5% versus 50%. What that means is these firms can, if they go out of business or their demand for sales goes down, if there is a revival, they can very quickly revive. They are more agile in that sense. So they can withstand a Corona-like situation better or come back to life far easier than a firm that has higher fixed cost, provided they have a credit constraint, like there's access to affordable credit. Because, for example, what happened during credit is this prolonged shutdown. Many of these guys would have their capital would have been completely wiped out. Restarting the firm in an economy that is already in recession, that would require some affordable sources of loan. Okay, so it's true that higher fixed cost firm, as this chart to the right shows, they tend to have higher turnovers, higher value added, etc., more profits. They tend to be more profitable. As you can see, both those who have access to credit and those who do not have access to credit. Don't look at the second half because very few firms have more than 60% of cost as fixed cost. So profitability increases, but the vulnerability also increases to any demand shock or even a supply shock. Another interesting thing is that firms that have access to credit tend to be, for at each level of fixed cost ratio, tend to be more profitable. So that's one thing that could make these firms more resilient, provided replenishing capital is easily available or is affordable. So they're vulnerable on many counts, but that their cost structure makes them able to come back to life pretty quickly. My next 2-3 slides, and then I'll close, are about people who work in. So far, I have talked about the firms. Now I want to talk about the employees who work in these. So this is from a different survey and more recent. So I told earlier that 35 million people work in food enterprises. This employment and employment survey counts around 33 million. This could be because there was slowdown in economy and the demonetization and GST shock, or it could be that their samples vary. Anyway, the numbers are in the ballpark. Most of them work in firms that have fewer than 6 employees, what we call micro enterprises. Less than 5 is counted as micro enterprises. For some reason, this sample has less than 6. So bulk of them, much more. The parenthesis number is in percentages. So in non-food enterprises, 50-60% work in less than 6 employee firms. In food enterprises, 81%. And the other thing, India has also reformed its labor code, which gives enterprises a lot of power to hire, fire, etc. Most of the non-food enterprise workers, they are casual workers with no benefits, no leave without leave with pay, no registration. Only 4% of them are salaried employees. What that means is that this labor code change, which seems unfair to a lot of people, especially center left or left, would leave them untouched. By and large, there's 96% of people because they anyway didn't have any benefits whatsoever in the way the economy is right now. They might even gain if changes in labor code leads to benefits from themselves. The other thing is that people who work in food enterprises tend to be poorer than other people who work in non-food enterprises. This is a OLS regression. Outcome variable is monthly income of people working in food enterprises, and we are controlled for a lot of employee characteristics. So you'll see that food sector industry, people who work in food sector industry earn significantly less than people who work in other form of formal or informal enterprise. Even after we control for all the things that generally affect income, skill level, and all those things. The second part, you'll see the coefficient right after it. There's a huge gender gap. So men's salary is or income is much higher than women's income. Again, we're controlling for a bunch of things. People who work in the 6 to 10, 10 to 20 is as the size of the firm, number of employees. People who work in larger firms tend to earn more income. As you would expect, cost of living is lower in rural areas. So rural incomes, people working in rural areas in food enterprises earn less than those working in urban areas. We have 2 rounds of data and we are controlling for region fixed effects. From 1718 to 1819, there was a small increase in wages of people working in food enterprises. Education, you'll see, has a negative coefficient, but it's quadratic. The square has positive value. So up to a certain years, 4 or 5 years of education doesn't matter. If you're literate versus 4 or 5 years of education, you're not earning more. But higher years of education, the combined effect is positive. You start earning more. One thing that is interesting is that if you look at 3 categories of people who work in food enterprises, the entrepreneurs or owners themselves, casual workers, and people who are salaried employees. Salaried employees have the highest earnings, followed by entrepreneurs, followed by casual workers. They have the lowest. This could be because salaried employees work in a different class of firm, and as a result, they get higher income. We are controlling only for the size of the firm here, number of people working, but they may be a very different class of firm altogether, and that could be one of the reasons why you are seeing the salaried people working more than even entrepreneurs. Second thing could be that this is a survey of entrepreneurs. All entrepreneurs tend to underreport their own profits and overreport their costs. Salary is a big part of the cost. That could be another reason why we are seeing this pattern. But the point being, the casual employees, most of them are casual. They earn much less than the non-casual, the salaried employees or entrepreneurs. Again, all this comparison is within our state. We are not doing interstate comparisons. We have summary stats on how it varies across states. Uh, last or second last slide is this. What this graph shows that of the different MPC's monthly per capita consumption expenditure. We do not collect income data in India as much. So it's a metric of how rich or poor you are. So as we move from left to right on this chart, households get rich. So you see that in urban areas, poorer households, people living in poorer households are more likely to be working in food enterprise. In rural areas, it's the opposite. I think the poorest are casual workers in farm, working as farm laborers, and they're landowners, and then I think these workers. In rural areas, households that are richer, if you are a member of a household that is richer, you are more likely to be working in food enterprises. So what it tells you is that people working in food enterprises are vulnerable, but the vulnerability of food enterprise employees is even higher in urban areas. And this matters for any welfare or social welfare programs or safety net programs that we create. In rural areas, actually, if you are an enterprise employee, you're probably doing better than many of your other counterparts, and you see that they are members of households. Urban areas, you see a opposite pattern. So this was my last data slide. So the key takeaways, there will be more, I guess, is one is food enterprises, like I said already, are growing and will become more important to India's food economy. But this economy is dominated, like India's overall economy, by very, very small enterprises. Most of them have low productivity and profitability. Like I said, 31%, they are earning even less than minimum wage, and very few links to formal institutions. So designing government programs or development programs for them would be challenging because they're not legible in many cases. Still, they are source of livelihoods for millions of poor urban families and rural families too, and a lot of women. Women find opportunity to work there. It's one of the few avenues that women can earn some money available to women. They have a small asset basis, so they are undercapitalized. They have weak credit links and no balance sheet. So this makes it difficult for them to access commercial loans or benefit from government programs like the one recently announced during COVID. It is not only a problem for the firms, it's also a problem for finance institutions, including microfinance institutions, such that targeting becomes difficult. Like whom to target, how to assess their credit rating, so to say. So what it is doing is, because many of them do not have balance sheets and you can't encourage them or not incentivize them enough to have balance sheets, is a lot of creating a space for innovations in India's fintech financial technology sector. They're using giving these guys smartphones and apps and tracking other metrics, like how much you, like all kinds of machine learning algorithms are being used to assess credit rating. I have some friends who work in this sector, and they're saying that these algorithms are getting better, and we'll see more and more use of these machine learning algorithms and other tech algorithms to assess credit worthiness and the lending. If these tools do become more effective as they are, then the lending constraints go down. So there is a space for fintech innovations. Unfortunately, the government banks are still not trying those things. It's all in the fintech, NBFC, microcredit sector. It's a very exciting space to watch. Low fixed cost, like I already said, makes them quite resilient to shocks, provided you can replenish their capital at affordable cost. Last point is, I alluded to how you look at the entire food economy, the employment and the value, especially from an employment perspective. The retail sector is the most important, is the largest percent of people employed in. Future work that we are considering is like looking more closely at the food retail segment. Some initial work we had already done, Manvi and I. It already shows that there is some consolidation happening, meaning top 5%, the share of top 5 or top 10 or top 20% of firms in the overall business done by food retail is growing very rapidly in India. And these larger firms, more profitable firms, they employ fewer people per dollar of business. So that will have, and like I said, India food sector is a huge employer. If this kind of retail sector consolidation goes on, the sector will become more efficient, but there will be employment challenges. It will become less labor intensive, which normally is a good thing, but will create challenges for many people to find their livelihoods in food retail sector. I'll end there. Thanks a lot for listening to me so patiently. Thank you.
Thanks, Avinash, for an excellent presentation. Now the questions have started coming. Christian Roth has a question.
So I should go to the chat window for questions.
I will.
Okay.
I didn't have a question, Kuhu. I was just thanking Avinash for a very informative and insightful presentation, because unfortunately I have to drop out. So thanks for taking us through your information and data.
Thanks, Christian.
Thank you. I think people are stunned by your. Okay. Now,
yeah, come on, give us feedback. It's a work in progress. We'd love some feedback, suggestions. We want to publish it soon.
Madhav, did you have a question?
Yeah, let me break the ice. So congratulations and thanks to Avinash for very informative and comprehensive presentation. I was struck by the data which Avinash showed that more women own for farm enterprises, but less women work in West Bengal. I want to check with Avinash, is it true?
No, it is the opposite, Madhav. In West Bengal, almost more than half of all food enterprises are owned by women.
Data showed 42 point some percentage they work, no. But 56 I think percent they own.
No, there is some confusion.
To go to that slide, maybe I saw it wrong.
Yeah, let me go to it.
Because slide, initial slides, Avinash is there.
Yeah, this is it, right?
Yeah, 56% women and 40% men in rural Bihar, even more important in the food economics, and 42% women and 27% men in rural West Bengal.
So this is, oh, sorry for the confusing language, Madhav. Thanks for pointing out. This is the top box is looking at all the women and men working in all kinds of enterprises, off-farm enterprises. 56% of women in West, let's say there are 100 women working in different kinds of off-farm enterprises in West Bengal. 56% of them are working in some sort of food enterprise. Does it make sense now? The bottom one is different. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Madhav.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to add, since the survey did not include cooperatives, and cooperatives are very strong in West Bengal and not so strong in Bihar, as I understand. So I think cooperatives are kind of, I think, would be a foundation for farm enterprises, because they have been moved in Uttarakhand, at least I know, to convert cooperatives into more commercial, more business platforms. And I think that is a good idea. So I thought maybe because cooperatives are strong in West Bengal, there is a tendency, there is a data trend which shows that more women could also, be owning up and working in farm enterprises. So do you think the missing of cooperatives from a survey as kind of is maybe a question which is a potential for future research?
So, Madhav, actually, I misspoke. I'm glad you're raising this point. So the survey does count cooperatives too. There's certain kind of cooperatives I'll have to go, and there are very few of them. So first thing is, the answer to the first part of your question is that cooperatives alone, they're such a small part of the overall landscape in number or in employment that alone won't change much. Second is, it does count cooperatives. I have to double check and I'll get back to you on like certain kinds of cooperatives that are excluded from enterprises, not all cooperatives. So
one of the slide you have said cooperatives.
Yeah, I know, I agree with you, and I need to be more precise there. So they are counting it, but I think 0 point something. They are even counting self-help groups, Madhav. So self-help groups, cooperatives, they are small in number. We checked actually what percentage of total employees in food enterprises are members of self-help groups or are self-help group based enterprises. Those are very small, like less than 1%, 2%. So won't change the overall summary. Thank you, though, for raising.
Yeah, I had one more other question.
Sure.
I think towards the end of the presentation, you said the women have more skills, but I think the skill, but they definitely are less remunerated. They are less, rewarded, less have less turnover and all that. I think the skill is only limited to manufacturing, not really registering, bookkeeping, managing. So the more, I think their skills is traditional nature, which is drudgery full, and also it's kind of more feminization of agriculture in manufacturing sector, in production sector, but less, more men dominate the rest of the value chain. So I think that tells us that a skill development has to be more engendered. What do you say to this comment?
So again, very good question, Madhav. 2 points I would say. One, I agree with your point. Two, just data limitations. One is when I presented this, when I say food manufacturing, it doesn't include on-farm food production. So this survey excludes farms. Okay. So when I say food manufacturing, it is off-farm, after harvest, after that thing. That's one. And you are pointing, what you're saying might be quite right, because one limitation that the data has, it doesn't tell us about the nature of skills. One thing that so it's quite likely what you're saying is that they know how to cook food or how to turn processed food, etc., which can be full of drudgery, etc., and do not have other business skills or commerce skills. That's quite likely. Unfortunately, the data doesn't tell us two things. One is what kind of skills are we talking about, and two is where were the skills picked up. There is a broad category. Did you learn it on the job or did you go to a vocational training? Most women and actually even men who are skilled in this sector have on-the-job skills. So what you're pointing out can be quite correct. Could be quite correct. We do not know, but it seems very, very high probability that your conjecture may be right.
Okay, I think we are out of time, so we have time for two. Time for two questions. Jahangir, if you will have a quick question, and then John Dixon has asked an interesting question about improving MSME productivity over the coming decade. The two last questions. So Jahangir, will you?
Yeah. Are you listening me?
Yeah, Jahangir, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, because my tone is down now in last couple of days. Thank you so much, Avinash. Congratulations, very good and very in depth. But I missed initial couple of slides. Just my question is directly just in different angle. For example, at the end you were mentioning a lot on for example, the contribution of the retail sector, and I guess this is and the similar way in Bangladesh as well, like economic contribution of the retail sector is growing, and also food enterprises. It's in urban and rural both areas. It's also increasing. For example, roadside vendor and so on. But there is huge concern about that, whether we are like this sort of expansion of the roadside food enterprises, for example, preparing food in the street and then the consumers are having that food, is really compromising the big concern that what my country at least is currently facing, the food safety angle. So what do you think in your cases, that have you looked at or just thought that what would be in the future about the food safety issues as the food enterprises are growing in both the rural and urban areas in your survey as well? So this is my question.
No, thanks a lot for asking these questions. We have looked at food safety issue. I think I didn't add it to the slide. A very pertinent question, especially during this time. So one thing is, my takeaway from this was, and we're planning to write an op-ed on it, is two things. One is, yes, food safety is a huge issue. Food safety and also nutrition issues. But let's focus on food safety. Less than 2% of food enterprises in India were registered under the Food Safety Authority Act. Okay, that's some number to keep in mind. Second is, given the very large number of extremely small and mobile and short-lived enterprises, what it tells me is that a regulatory approach to improving food safety is not going to work, because reaching 60 million, 20 million very, very small, mobile, temporary type, not temporary, but enterprises through a regulatory authority would be well nigh impossible, right? The kind of regulatory capacity that is needed. So we need food safety to improve. What we should do, and this year is a good year when food safety is salient in everyone's mind, is it has to be awareness and enabling led approach, and not a regulatory approach where you set penalties and you set punishments for not observing certain norms. Because if you try to enforce strict rules, what it will do is, it will not only you will not be able to cover most of these firms because they're so small and widespread. Actually, the business will move from larger formal enterprises to informal enterprises, which happens repeatedly whenever you try very strict regulations with limited regulatory capacity. So our promoting food safety agenda should look at this landscape and accordingly devise strategies which should not overestimate state capacity and should not overestimate our state's ability, Bangladesh or India, to enforce regulations, to enforce laws, or to penalize people. That's the lesson that I have. Awareness generation and enabling, both on the consumer side and across the value chain, I guess, should be the strategy that would work more. The last point I would say that we should invest. While I'm saying that regulatory approach is not the best way to do, we should invest a lot more in our respective food safety authorities, their capacity, their regulatory capacity, their measurement, awareness generation capacities. India has started doing it. I know Bangladesh also recently set up the authority and is working with IFPI to strengthen it. Thanks a lot for an excellent question, Jahangir. Yeah.
Thank you, Avinash. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. John, who would you read out John's question? Good to see you, John. We haven't seen you in a while.
Avinash, it's been a while, but congratulations for stepping into this relatively unexplored area. It's very important.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Yeah.
I was particularly interested in the game changers that might emerge for the more informal, the unincorporated, and the smaller units, which are sources of livelihoods and employment in rural areas, and part of that farm, non-farm multiplier linkages. What are the game changers, the technological and institutional innovations that are required or might emerge over the next decade?
So thanks a lot, John, for this interesting question. One that I know of that is picking up more in urban areas than in rural areas as of now is the fintech sector. So all small firms, cooperatives or individually owned, credit is always a challenge, affordable credit, working capital loan. So, and these firms, most of them do not have collaterals. Like I said, they do not have balance sheets. So financial technology with the spread of mobile phones and smartphones, etc., using other metrics and a mix of metrics and multiple variables to assess credit worthiness and use that to build loan to lend to firms. So I'm quite excited about fintech and how it will at least reduce one of the constraints, which is the credit constraint. That's the one that I see is an opportunity. The second opportunity, which I have a mixed view on, I should say, is growing incomes in general. Across the world, as incomes grow, people's consumption of whole grains and unprocessed foods go down compared to the consumption of processed foods, fried foods, good processing, bad processing, all of that. That on one hand is an opportunity for the sector to grow. On the other hand, it will pose a nutritional challenge and health and food safety challenge that Jahangir was talking about. So it's a growth opportunity with growing economy, but there are also associated challenges. If you have other things in your mind, I would love to hear from you. I can't think of only the one right now. I'm sure there are other opportunities out there. The third one, actually, if China is a model, sorry, that comes to mind, is the Amazon model or the Alibaba model, where getting raw materials of different kinds is becoming cheaper as food logistics improve and the networks get connected to each other. Like for example, in India, Reliance is trying to link all 20 million odd retail outlets, food retail outlets, to their app and like become a supplier to all of them. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or not a good thing, but that can change. That can make the sector more efficient. That can bring more data based on which more support can be given. But it could also lead to exploitation where you have one large firm that is dominating. The good thing is, in competition to Reliance, other companies like Tata's, Amazon, now Walmart, they are also entering the market. If there's a competition among these large players to reach out to these disconnected millions of units and connect them to logistics supply chain and data chain, I think that might help, but it would require good amount of data protection for these small firms and other support. So India's regulatory state has to raise its game so that it doesn't become big guys completely dictating the sector. I'm sure there are other opportunities, but I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Avinash. It's time to end this session. It's very interesting and lots of interesting questions. I will hand over to Tamara to say the final words. Hey, over to you, Tamara.
Thank you, Kuhu. Thanks, Avinash, for a great presentation, as always. Just so much information. And I think it's a really interesting kind of addition to, our normal work around the production side, but then thinking about this really interesting, part of the food system that is obviously really important, not just for urban households, but for the rural households we work with as well. Thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope to see you next month at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening in and asking questions. See you soon in the next webinar. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.